If Michigan is Mila Kunis, then the Ohio State Buckeyes are Jessica Alba, okay? That's the best way for me to put it. Now, that's not going to make sense to you at first, but when we're talking Michigan and Ohio State, over and over again, the Michigan fans get on to me. They say, I'm not showing Michigan enough love. Listen, we're Mila Kunis. We're a pretty dang good looking team. I like it. We're exotic. I'm into it. It's my flavor, but I think that Jessica Alba's a little bit cuter, a little bit prettier, a little bit nicer on paper. Now, you may have a difference of opinion there. You may be a Mila Kunis person. You may be a Jessica Alba person. Regardless, they're both pretty. They're both pretty. And I'm not knocking one just because I say the other's hotter. That's it. That's the best way to put it. Welcome everybody, this is On Tap Sports. We cover all the sports all the time, primarily Michigan, Ohio State, the Big Ten, all that good stuff, but really, we have an emphasis on college football at large. And here today, we're gonna talk about whether or not Ohio State is overrated. Now, obviously, I just now made the comparison, and I got them ahead of Michigan. If you're talking actual talent and what that team is on the field, I have them ahead of Michigan. We're gonna talk about them compared to some other teams in the rest of this video. Let's finish off with this Michigan thing though, really quick. Let's just look at the facts because now we're 6 games in. We have enough of a sample size to actually come up with an actual real theory that makes sense on who is actually better. And I think 3 of the things that I want to look at are number 1, where these teams rank on their offensive numbers and their defensive numbers. Number 2, yards per game for the offense and defense. And number 3, points per game for the offense and defense. Let's see how Michigan and Ohio State square up, and then we'll get into the rest of the teams quickly. The first thing is where they rank. Ohio State's offense is the number 2. This is according to NCAA.com. Is the number 2 offense, just behind Coastal Carolina. Now, I know on ESPN they have Ohio State as the number 1. That's tomatoes, tomatoes. They're number 2. Michigan is the number 43 offense. That is a 41 rank discrepancy. All right, fine. Michigan's a defensive team. So that's where it really matters, right? That's where we can actually catch up to them, right? Well, we're the number 23 ranked defense. They are the number 76 ranked defense. That is a 53 slot difference. That means that Michigan's defense, the discrepancy between Michigan's defense and Ohio State's defense is larger than the discrepancy between Ohio State's offense and Michigan's offense. So Michigan would win that. If you're talking actual offense versus offense, defense versus defense, Michigan's going to win that. We'll give them the check mark on that one. Now, I will argue that Ohio State made that defensive coordinator change, and things have looked a lot better as of late, but for now, we're going to say Michigan has that. Fine. The check mark goes to them there, but now let's look at yards per game, and we know that Ohio State offense is very explosive through the air specifically, and when they want it to get it on the ground, they can do that as well. They average 563.2 yards per game, and Michigan averages 440.5 yards per game. That is a 122.7 yards per game discrepancy. That's a big difference, okay? Again, we know their offense is better than our offense, so that should be of no surprise. And again, 6 games into the season, this is starting to give us a large enough sample size. You can't sit there saying, well, they've played them and they've played them and this and that. That at this point is irrelevant. The schedules are pretty even, to be honest with you. And we're 6 games in. Both teams have played some cupcakes. Both teams have played some good defenses at this point. So that is what it is. And now you look at the Ohio State defense. They give up 387.3 yards per game. We give up 310. That's a 77.3 yards per game difference. That is less than the 122.7 that Ohio State and Michigan differ on the offensive side. So we'll give the check mark to Ohio State there. Finally, points per game, 48.5 points per game for that Ohio State offense. God, that's going to be, I mean, you literally got to score 49 points on average just to beat them, okay? Now, Oregon didn't have to do that. That's because it was beginning of the season, and Ohio State didn't bring their best effort. So hopefully we'll get that Ohio State. But you got to score 49 points just to beat Ohio State. By the averages. Michigan averages 38.5 points per game. That's a 10 point per game difference. And now the defense of Ohio State gives up 20.5. Michigan gives up on average 15.5. That's an average of 5, obviously. So Ohio State gets a check mark there as well. Now, I picked 3 random statistics, but they're key statistics in my opinion. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can compare the two. But the fact of the matter is, one, like I said, Mila Kunis versus Jessica Alba. You both are hot. Both are pretty. One's a little bit prettier, in my opinion. So that's what I'm going to go with. Ohio State over Michigan right now. That is that comparison that you guys, most of my viewers, are interested in. Now let's get into some more teams to compare them to. We won't go into all those stats and all that stuff. This will be more matter of opinion kind of thing. So the teams ahead of Ohio State, this is what I did when I did the Michigan overrated video. We weren't. I decided that we were properly rated, not underrated, not overrated, but properly rated. Let's see which teams ahead of Ohio State do I think Ohio State would win against in a neutral field, on a neutral field. The first team is Georgia. Now, for the time being, I'm going to go ahead and give Georgia their clout. I'm going to say Georgia would beat Ohio State on a neutral field. Man, if they match up in the national championship game, which is possible, quite likely, that would be a game for the ages, I would imagine. Very good defense versus very good offense. I'd be for it, okay? So we'll give Georgia the nod there. And Cincinnati at the 3 slot right now in the rankings, we'll go ahead and give them the nod. Listen, I think Ohio State would beat Cincinnati head-to-head. And so if you're asking me, if you put me, in a corner and said, you got to pick a team, Ohio State or Cincinnati, it's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I'm going to take Ohio State. I don't even think that's remotely close, to be honest with you. I think Cincinnati's going to falter throughout the season. I think they're going to lose 1, maybe 2 games to teams they have no business losing 1, maybe 2 games. That's an unpopular opinion for some reason right now. I don't know if you guys have been watching mid-major teams in the past, but my theory is probably more correct than yours, honestly, if we're talking historically speaking. We'll see. We'll see who's right, who's wrong in that. But I think Cincinnati's going to lose. I think Ohio State would beat them. So if you actually ask me my opinion, I would put Ohio State over Cincinnati. But Iowa, come on, man. Are you going to pick Iowa or Ohio State on a neutral field? You're going to pick Ohio State. Oklahoma, come on. They have to take everything they have to beat Texas late down the stretch. They had a tough game against Tulane. They had a tough game against Kansas State. They are struggling. Ohio State would beat Oklahoma on a neutral field day in and day out as long as they brought even their B effort. Alabama would be the very interesting one. And to me, I think it's very unfair. It doesn't matter. Rankings are rankings. The college football playoff rankings are what really matters, and what happens down the stretch is what really matters. But Alabama has no business being ahead of Ohio State if you're actually looking at the resume. If you're taking your SEC bias out of everything, they have no business being ahead of Ohio State. They had the scare against Florida. They didn't look particularly great against Ole Miss, 42-21 in that game. That's pretty blah. I mean, it's a 21-point win over Ole Miss, but I'm just not as high on the Ole Miss lane train as everybody else is. And then you got the A&M loss. I mean, you compare that to Ohio State, if you actually compare the resumes and what team has looked better, I think Ohio State has looked better than Alabama. Now, I'm going to get into this in a second, but Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, I've seen on ESPN where they're saying Alabama's in real trouble here. Yeah, sure, they're in real trouble of not making the playoffs, but if they do make the playoffs, man, these playoffs have the potential to be very, very special, but we'll get into that in just a second. Teams behind Ohio State. If you look at a neutral field, could Penn State beat Ohio State on a neutral field? Yes, they could. Could Michigan? Yes, they could. Oregon? Yes, we already know that. They beat them in Columbus. And Michigan State, yes, they could on a neutral field. But if you had $1,000 and you were betting between those 4 teams, Ohio State versus Penn State, versus Michigan, versus Oregon, versus Michigan State, you had $1,000, could you really look me straight in the face on a neutral field and say you would put that $1,000 at risk and you would pick the other team and not Ohio State? If you can legitimately say that, you are probably being emotionally driven towards that decision, to be honest with you. Ohio State is better on paper and on the field than all 4 of those teams. More often than not, even though they lost to Oregon early in the season, more often than not, you would put that $1,000, or you should put that $1,000 on Ohio State to win the game. Some other teams behind those that it wouldn't even be close: Kentucky, Oklahoma State, nope, give me Ohio State. Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Coastal Carolina, nope, give me Ohio State. Wake Forest, which right now Ohio State is predicted to be in a bowl game against Wake Forest. Goodness, would that be a boring, absolutely sleeper, snoozer of a bowl game? That would be boring. Ohio State would absolutely obliterate Wake Forest. Arkansas, nope. Arizona State, nope. Yada, yada, yada. Florida, nah. None of those teams are beating Ohio State, okay? So Ohio State, none of the teams that are behind them, in my opinion, should be ahead of them, and there are plenty of teams ahead of them that they should be ahead if you're actually looking and you know football and you know what to look for. In my opinion, if I was actually picking the rankings today and you said don't go off a resume, because, if I'm going off a resume, resume. Iowa, Cincinnati, and technically Oklahoma for being undefeated, they need to be ahead of Alabama and Ohio State. But if you said, Ray, pick the 4 best teams in America right now, my order, I know my first 3, I'm going to pick the last one off the top of my head. I would go Georgia, then Ohio State, then Alabama, then give me, I mean, it's a toss-up, man. For the number 4 team in the nation, with a healthy Sean Clifford, I like Penn State. Now, that's probably not going to be the case for Penn State. They have a gauntlet of a schedule, and we're about to get into that in just a second. But that is, on paper, in terms of talent-wise, I think they would probably be the number 4 team. I like them over Oklahoma and some of the other teams I see here. But like I just mentioned, the gauntlet of the Big Ten East, man, it is so wide open. None of these teams have actually played each other. Now, Penn State is behind the 8 ball here with the loss to Iowa. If they had lost that game first week of the season against Wisconsin, they'd be all but out right now. But you got Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State. On Friday, I'm going to predict and show you where all those 4 teams are going to end up in the Big Ten East by season's end, in my opinion. And I think it's going to be a very good video in terms of interest because I'm interested in it. I think it's a cool one, man. The Big Ten East probably is the best division in college football right now. If you're actually looking at possible, scenarios and what could happen there, man, it's wide open. I think I know what's going to happen, but it's more open than usual, that's for sure. Ohio State is not as much of a sure slot to get there in the Big Ten championship game as they normally are. So I've gone over all of that. Let me finish here with what I was talking about with the playoffs. Ohio State, first of all, if you haven't gathered by now, I think they're underrated. I would put them at number 2 in the nation if you gave me the opinion. If you said I had to go off a resume, I would put them at number 4 in the nation behind Georgia, Iowa, and Cincinnati if I had to. But again, I think they're number 2 and Alabama's number 3. That's my personal opinion. Now, with those 3 teams, if Alabama is able to run the table, and it's Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, no matter the order, the 4th team's not really going to matter. It's going to be your typical Notre Dame or Oklahoma team that's going to get blown out in the first round of the playoffs. Personally, that's what I think. So, what I have to say about this is Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, if you gave me a round robin between those 3 teams, man, I would have a really tough time deciding who would win. I can make points and cases against and for those teams, all 3 of them. I think this year, most years for me, it is 1 team or 2 teams that have the real possibility of winning, the actual legitimate possibility of winning. This year, I think if Alabama can get in and run the table, if Ohio State can get in and run the table, this year's playoffs is wide open between those 3 things. Now, a lot of things can change from now till then. Injuries can happen, all that sort of stuff. But wow, you look at Alabama, what they can do on the offensive side of the ball, and what Ohio State can do on the offensive side of the ball versus what Georgia can do on the defensive side of the ball. And really, the other way around, all 3 teams have their weakness. So Ohio State's defense, although they're shoring some things up, they have some weaknesses. Alabama's secondary definitely has some weaknesses. And Georgia, while their offense is playing well right now, I would argue that down the stretch, we're going to see a worse Georgia offense than what we've seen so far. Their schedule gets a little bit meatier moving forward. So we're going to see. But I think the playoffs have, if those teams get in, and they might not. It's been a weird year. Clemson's already out of it, but if those 3 teams get in, we're in for a show. That's for sure. So that's that. That's the video. Ohio State is not overrated. In fact, in my opinion, they are underrated. And I explained to Michigan fans at the beginning of the video, stop thinking that I don't think we're pretty. I think we're pretty. We're just not on Ohio State's level yet. When we get there, Ohio State fans are going to be mad at me because they're going to say that I'm too much of a homer. So all I'm doing is giving my opinion, whether I'm a Michigan fan or not. I'm just giving my opinion however I see it. So when we're better, I guess I'll just have to argue with some Ohio State fans on there as well. So that is what it is. We'll see you guys tomorrow for how Michigan and Ohio State fans watch Week 6 games. I'll have that out around 5 p.m. tomorrow, and then hopefully I have the release for Thursday and Friday. We'll see you then. Take care. God bless.